Okay, right. So we're on to the Sermon on the Mount, Part 9, the Law and the Prophets. As I was saying, normally when we look at a passage, we're just looking at a few verses where Jesus unpacks one beatitude. But as we kind of get towards the end of the Sermon on the Mount, it becomes just a very handful of verses. It's a small handful. So I didn't want to do two weeks with just 6 verses, so I thought we'd put the two together. Although, of course, the final verse is perhaps one of Jesus' most important pronouncements at all in all of the Gospels, in terms of summing up the idea of teaching and what is required of us. So, pardon me, we're going to be looking at those who mourn and also the poor in spirit together as we work through. So it starts in Matthew 7. With those words, don't judge lest you be judged. For with whatever verdict you pronounce, you will be judged, and the measure you measure will be measured to you or measured by. It's one of those. It's a profound kind of principle of fairness that almost everybody gets. The idea of which psychologists will often refer to as reciprocity, and actually we're going to see at the end of this passage, Jesus kind of makes that very famous statement, which is about how you treat people initially, how you kind of get going with things. But he kind of also introduces it here. The measures that you use, you will tend to find them coming back to you. I'm not quite sure whether it really relates, but there's that verse in Ecclesiastes, which I always liked, which talks about cast your bread in the water, and in many days it will return to you. And I can never quite get my head around it. It feels to me if you were fishing and you chuck bread on the water, you probably do quite well out of it because the fish come, or maybe you're fishing for ducks or something. So chuck your bread on the water. Some days it returns. The idea of what you're giving comes back. What you sow, you reap. And that is a spiritual principle. It seems to be something that Jesus kind of endorses in this way. Not in an absolute sense. It's not total cause and effect. It's almost a by faith, but actually there is an expectation, and it's a really key one. As we're going to kind of as we see as we go through the verses, it's right at the heart of the self-knowledge that the Lord kind of uses to produce growth and development in a discipleship sense. So that the measure we're going to use is going to be the measure that is used against us and for us. And of course, it's Jesus tells the story of the ungrateful steward who's forgiven an enormous debt and then won't forgive the smaller debt that he's owed. Jesus has already unpacked when we were looking at the issue of prayer. If you can't forgive, then your Father in heaven won't forgive you. There's something about the flow of forgiveness and grace that we're being encouraged into, and here it's about therefore moderating our judgment. And because judgment is and we have to kind of measure it. It's not an absolute statement, this. I've kind of been highlighting this in the other sessions we do, which is that the way Jesus presents things are in kind of, if you like, they're horizon markers. We're drawn towards the horizon. They're markers on the horizon, which sometimes you'll find there's a conflict between two, So actually, as we think about it today, give to those who ask, okay? So if you give to those who ask, but what about if someone is going to take the money you give them and buy alcohol with it because they're an alcoholic? So that may not be a good thing. So actually, your love for others, and as we're going to think this verse is in there too, that treat others the way you would want to be treated at your best. If I was an alcoholic, I wouldn't want people to give me money to buy alcohol, even if I asked them. So you get, if you like, truths that are out there, but they're held in tension. And that's really key, because I think a lot of the worst abuses in church are because people try and they sort of create a mental dissonance where in different contexts they're sticking 100% with one rule and 100% with another rule, but the two kind of sometimes are clashing. Actually, we've got to understand them in terms of something that draws us, and there is often therefore a tension between them. And that's why we still need the Spirit to interpret and give us the wisdom in the moment. It's nice and easy to think, well, I just have a simple rule. So somebody asks me, I'll give them. Then I've run out of money and I haven't got anything to give. And somebody with a real need comes along because somebody who was just going for it asked for everything. So it's not that the words that Jesus speaks are kind of things we have to be slavish to. They are the direction. He puts those markers, as I say, ahead of us. And as we walk towards them, we sometimes will find there's a kind of a conflict between two. Perhaps conflict is the wrong word. I prefer the word tension. We live in the tension of those ideas. So he says, why do you examine the speck in your brother's eye? And now we're turning into this issue of we need to kind of understand ourselves and understand the demands that I make on others. And if we're going to go back, actually, don't judge lest you be judged, because whatever your verdict you pronounce, you will be judged. And the measure you measure, you'll be measured by. So now Jesus starts, he said, we need to understand ourselves. How gracious or not, how generous is our eye with other people? And actually, if we kind of aware of it, and we become more aware of it, actually there's a kind of a challenge to us. We end up having to have a little bit more humility in the pronouncements we make. So why do you examine the speck in your brother's eye, but you fail to notice the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, allow me to take the speck out of your own eye while there's still a plank in your own eye? The speck out of your eye while there's still a plank in yours. You hypocrite play actor, first take the plank out of your own eye and then you'll see clearly. And the image again, you notice how it ties together several of the things we've already gone through over the last few weeks. So the hypocrite play actor is I'm doing things for performance, but now Jesus is bringing it back into play. But equally, we've been talking about if your eye is good or if your eye is bad. And if your eye is bad, the whole world is full of darkness. And actually that is true. It's true in a very real way. There are more neurons and there's more information that is sent from our brain to our eyes than actually goes from our eyes to our brains. That's because our eyes don't send everything to our brains. It's already been filtered. And actually the things we notice, the things that we have learnt to see as important. So Jesus is quite correct when he talks about the patterns in our eye, and your eye is good. And if your eye is bad, so if you've been hurt by people, and you allow that into yourself, you will tend to see everything around you as a precursor to being hurt again. So the darkness in you starts to kind of make everything darker. And so now as we're dealing with the good and actually how am I going to deal with all the negatives that I've got in who I am? Jesus hasn't left us floating without hope, saying if your eye is bad, your whole body is full of darkness. What he's now saying is, okay, think about how you judge others, how quick you are to see it in those people. Now, but actually, is it because you can't see clearly because there's a plank in your own? And so the challenge is in as you put the pieces together, is as I notice myself judging others, because we all will. And remember, there are times when you could take the words of Jesus when he speaks to the Pharisees and you could say, isn't Jesus judging the Pharisees? And he doesn't absolutely outright say, the don't judge lest you be judged assumes that actually there is a judgment. It's about moderating it. And so don't be quick to judge. Don't be quick to judge because you are going to be judged. And so in that kind of a context, one of the ways actually we kind of grow in self-knowledge and therefore as part of the spiritual growth process is, and we can actually turn it around on ourselves and say, what is it I tend to notice most in others? Because if I notice it most in them, then perhaps there's something in me. Perhaps there is a plank obscuring the way I see the world. That perhaps there's something getting in the way. What I see as a speck in you might actually be because there's a great big thing in me that is so big I don't notice it. And so first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And on a personal level, because I if I can say it without a way of kind of sounding like I'm very pious, but I actually found this a really helpful process. I know my personality and character has changed because my wife tells me I'm nicer than I used to be, and if my wife tells me I'm nicer than I used to be, I ought to believe her. And part of that process was actually recognizing that where I was quick to judgment, what is it in me that's making me see that so regularly? And actually, as I started to identify certain things in myself and I'd give them to the Lord, you actually are going through a process of removing, and you do see more clearly. So one of the experiences I found was that actually, as I kind of got those things removed, I could see them more clearly at work in other people. But you do so with less judgment because you realize what it is you've dealt with in yourself. And I was really encouraged to see it because I remember I was really sure of the principle. I used to started to teach others, but I was a bit nervous that, that actually you do become more gracious. You see, so if you notice jealousy in yourself, and because you notice it because you think I'm always thinking, oh, so and so's acting jealously, or so and so's acting jealously, or da da. So because I'm doing that, I wonder what I'm jealous of. Let's ask that question. Let's turn it around. Okay, now I start to understand it. As you clear the blockage, you start looking around and you see it playing all over the place. But you don't become more judgmental. You actually become more empathetic. And I was really encouraged to find in an article by Watchman Nee, if anyone remembers his famous books for the Little Flock movement. He talks about the same process, that what the Lord deals with in you, you see more clearly in other people, but you don't see it with judgment. You see it kind of with compassion and kindness because you realize what God's covered in you. So for me, these verses are actually a real important part of Christian discipleship. This way of understanding the judgments I would make on others, turning them around, recognizing what's blocking me, making me see things in those ways, and looking to the Lord to deal with those in grace. And then actually somehow I become a better pastor because you see people's flaws much more clearly, but not from a proud point of view of I'm glad I'm not like that, but because you can actually know the journey you've gone through. If that makes sense. So I really always regularly encourage people to take these verses really seriously and actually just make it a practice. Don't wait for the crises, just try and make it a practice. Always ask yourself the question when I'm sitting there annoyed by someone, what is it in me that makes me really notice this? It might be legitimate, but it might be that there's something I kind of need to challenge in myself. And then we have a couple of verses that almost seem like they're standalone. So don't give what's holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before pigs. Oh, actually, I made it alliterate there because you can. I had a look in the when I was doing this translation. Don't give what's holy to the hounds. So I like alliteration. So don't give what's holy to the hounds, nor cast your pearls before pigs, so they can trample on them with their feet, and then having turned, rip into you. You'll normally see it says rend and rend you. But actually rend means to rip into something. So I think that's a slightly more modern sort of phrase, and they'll rip into you. And actually there is a kind of I'm not quite sure, I haven't kind of worked out why it follows on in this passage. But I think it is about, again, it's about being pious with folks, that sometimes as you kind of as you start to clear your eye and you see more clearly, and if we go back, remember, you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So actually, as I've dealt with things in me, I can see them in more other people. There might be a tendency or a temptation in me to now go and try and sort out in you what God's just sorted out in me. So I think in that sense, Jesus was saying, but actually don't give what's holy. If it's special to you, be careful with it, because it might just annoy someone. So if the Lord's been kind of dealing with me for my cynicism and sarcasm, for instance, and it's amazing that he's done this, and I'm no longer as cynical, I'm no longer as sarcastic, and I see someone, I want to go over there and tell them what the Lord's done for me. See, it's holy to me, but to them, they're not in that place. They're more like a hound. Just a quick comment on that word hound. it's different from the word when Jesus is with the Syrophoenician woman. You remember the story, and she says, even the dogs eat the crumbs from their table. The words are different. So if you do a quick kind of these are hounds, and they're more like kind of guard dogs in people's minds. That's what dogs were kept for, really. Whereas the word that the Syrophoenician woman uses is puppy dogs. So while they're still young and they still live in the house and they're still playing with the children, that's the word she uses. Whereas here it's the kind of these. So if you go around and you see a flaw in someone that the Lord's dealt with within you, and you just go and you kind of blunder in, hey, God can help you with this, they may not like it. I always remember one of it's not a particularly profound story, but we were doing some open air work in a street market area, and a large bloke who was one of the stall owners started really blowing off at things about, and he obviously had an issue with Christians, and a young guy was trying to earnestly kind of talk with him and try and answer his questions. And I was standing back watching what was going on, just kind of praying quietly. And the guy I was standing next to said the trouble is he's casting his pearl before swine, which I thought was very rude because I didn't want to call somebody who you're trying to evangelize a pig. But what he was driving at was actually the person it was not in a place where he wanted to hear any of this, and actually it was just antagonizing him more, and it was getting louder and louder and louder. It's a real principle, but I think in kind of context of where it is in the Sermon on the Mount, it's probably because the very things that are most holy to me, the things the Lord's just done within me, I will see them more clearly. I will feel I've got compassion in it, and part of that compassion is I have to know when not to share them, not when not to throw what God's done in me in front of somebody else. There is a time and a place, and it can be a very effective and very helpful thing when you're able to say, I'm not telling you that this is what you must do, but I used to be quite like this. I'll use sarcasm, because when I was a teenager, I was very sarcastic. I remember my sister laughing once because I just made somebody look very small who she didn't like very much. And she said, oh, I love my brother. She said, there's nobody as good at pouring cold water on somebody else's idea as you are. And it was such a shock when she said it. That was one of the early things I had to review about myself. I could probably still do it if I need to. I'm not saying I should be proud of it, but actually sometimes it's helpful to be able to share a story, but you need to know, is the person ready or not? So then Jesus says, now ask and it will be given to you. We seem to now be moving on, and this would be the where normally I'd break this into two sections, but we've only got 12 verses, so. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you'll find. Knock and it will be open to you. Because everyone asking receives, and the seeker finds, and the one knocking it will be opened. And to the one knocking it will be opened. And so the wonderful thing is, in many ways, is as you start to turn your attention to yourself. As I said right at the beginning, the whole of this kind of passage is unpacking the Beatitudes. I won't go back to the first slide. It's unpacking the Beatitudes of blessed are those who mourn. And if you look through the Old Testament, you'll find that mourning is about taking sin seriously. In the end, obviously, sin brings death. And so mourning, we understand, is related to death. But more generally, it's those who take what's wrong with the world seriously. And so we've actually just been going through these verses, which are about learning to turn and reflect on ourselves, which can make me very mournful. And actually it can be quite an uncomfortable process. It's a very freeing and liberating one as you come through it. But there is a season when you're in that kind of mourning place. And actually it makes me very aware as I mourn of my poverty of spirit. So we're now back to the first Beatitude. That actually this now, because of it, actually it's not because somehow I deserve it and the Lord is lucky to have me. I become very conscious of the fact that I'm in need of grace. I've mourned over what's wrong with me and I didn't want it, and I've tried to deal with the planks in my own eye. But actually in that place, in my dependency, the good news is God wants to give what I'm looking for. So ask him and you will receive. And I think it's important to, again, to put the promise in its context, because we can strip this out. And I can remember when I was at school, this is a long time ago, going along to a Louis Palau mission with my sister had a boyfriend at school who wasn't a Christian, And he was kind of laughing. He agreed he would come to the Louis Palau meeting, and he was kind of laughing, going, so that verse where Jesus says, ask and it'll give you. So I want a Porsche. Can I ask him for a Porsche? Anyway, we were kind of trying to find answers for him. But you see, there is a context to this. And the context is actually my spiritual growth and development, as we saw. The funny thing is, that young lad, David, is now a Christian believer. I'm still friends with him on Facebook. So he really was seeking. So he did actually, those who were seeking did actually find. He may never have got his Porsche. Well, he might have done, but not that way anyway. But he did seek and he did find. So, or which of you, if his son asks for bread, and I do love this passage, because Jesus is really kind of saying, so you're in this place, you understand and you've mourned over what needs to happen in you. You're in a place of dependence. You become poor in spirit. So now I need to ask for help. But here's the good news. One is, if you're seeking, God will answer you. He will find. He will open the door to those who knock. And then he turns it around and says, now which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? And I always think there's incredible kind of life in this statement, because there are an awful lot of folks, if you throw it out there, there's a thing in some fathers which is very competitive with their kids, and they think it's jokey, but they do things like that sometimes. And it's a kind of an interesting just to think in terms of whether some of those listening going, oh, well, actually, I did do a bit of a joke like that once. Which of you do? Well, you might be like that, but or if he asks for a fish, you would give him a snake. Well, I wouldn't go that extreme. That extreme, but I might do some of those things where a kid wants something and I think it's funny, because I'm not that healed a father at the moment to do something a bit jokey. So if you, being evil, know how to give good gifts, but the thing is, I know what I ought to have done, and actually I would never go as far as to give a snake if they ask for a fish, but I might think it was funny to give a stone when they ask for bread. If you know how to give good gifts, how much more will your Father in heaven give things to those who ask him? And again, we're in the context of, I'm dealing with those flaws in me, and those flaws in me which I'm dealing with and giving to him. So it then finishes, in everything you do to others as much as you would wish people do for you, because this is the law and the prophets. And I wasn't sure whether to put this in this week or whether to save it for next week, but I figured it's kind of a conclusion here. So in everything then, do to others as much as you would wish people do to you. This is the law and the prophets. When we do this on the longer sessions, I'll probably spend almost the whole evening looking at how, well, not the whole evening, we'll spend a large amount of time looking at how this idea, which is sometimes referred to as the golden rule, is a kind of a universal, and in that almost every religion and every thinker has come up with a version of this. But when you look at all of the versions, there are about 20 or 30 versions of it. Jesus is the pinnacle of all of them. We kind of actually break it down so you can actually see it in different ways. So it's often said, you will often hear people say, oh, Hillel, the rabbi I mentioned a few weeks ago, he taught the golden rule before Jesus. Actually, Jesus contrasts with Hillel, because Hillel said, don't do to others what you don't want them to do for yourself. Everything else is just commentary. So Jesus is clearly making a reference to what Hillel has said. This is the law and the prophets. It's kind of like all of the law is summed up in this. So Hillel says, don't do to others what you don't want them to do to yourself. That's the law. Everything else is commentary. That's his statement. Jesus says, actually, everything that you would wish others would do for you, you do that for them. And that's not the same as I heard a critic the other day say Jesus said, do to others what they want you to do. And that's not good advice, because, I think actually Jesus never said do to them what they want you to do. He said do to them what you would want to have done to you. And so that means my best understanding of what I need in terms of help is how I should approach those others around me. So actually that does mean I don't do necessarily what they want me to do, but I do what I know would be the best thing for them, with the knowledge I have and the vision I have and my ability to see clearly, because I've dealt with the planks in my own eye and so on. So those are my thoughts on these verses. You probably got the sense I really like these verses, but then I say that about everything when we're working through them. But you'll get the sense of I think they're very practical, they're very applicable. They're kind of a thing which I almost would guarantee if you do apply them will changes your perspective. Doesn't matter how much you've grown so far or not, because they get right at the heart process of understanding the way I see the world, which is actually shaped by the things that are already in me. As I see those things, I start to see the causes in other people with greater clarity. But I need to have grace, I need to have wisdom, I need to not antagonize them by throwing my pearls before them. And actually, I need to come at it all with a sense that God is with me in this process. He is for me, and as I'm trying to grow up, I come with an expectation that if I'm looking for help, not because I'm asking for a Porsche, but I'm looking for that growth in these kind of areas, then this is a prayer that actually Jesus has endorsed, that the Father really wants to answer. So those are my thoughts. Did anyone want to ask any questions or make some comments into that mix?
Kristen.
Julian, I can see. Yep.
Yeah, I was just right at the beginning. You mentioned eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and people like get the Porsche, and if you do that, that happens. But someone mentioned to me, because a lot of people take that seriously, don't they? They think eye for an eye, and they think, oh, it kind of smacks of revenge. But someone carefully said once, be the eye for the other person. So the bit that you see missing, just go and be that missing bit, which I thought was a lovely spin on the verse.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think it's not what the in its context when God gave it, as I often point out, is he gives it into a people who assume that if you took my eye, I'll kill you and your family. Yeah. So it's actually a restraint. It's saying the law has to be balanced. So you can't take two eyes, you can only take one. So I think that's what the context is given. But you're right, you can actually turn these things around and understand them. And that's often part of the grace that's in a person and how they bring it into the mix. But yeah.
I agree. It is the restraint, the lex talionis, as I said. You cannot take a leg for an eye or a leg for an arm. It's an eye for an eye and a leg for a leg.
Yeah.
It's a restrictive
thing,
measure
yeah.
rather than judgmental. And
because actually when the rule of law is first coming in, so the just to kind of clarify there, what you're talking about is the common law across the Levant. So Israel's law, God gives his law within a context of a kind of common understanding of law. So it's a restraint, but here we're looking at this process of growth and actually exercising grace with others as you're going through growth and revelation yourself, which is what we're. Any other kind of comments or thoughts?
I very much agree with that thing of seeing your own faults in others. What tends to wind you up, which I think is why we don't like it, because it reminds us of our own faults and vulnerability.
Yeah, no. I always remember laughing. I was watching a news report once. It was one kind of more chatty program. And there was something that was going on. This is way back when I was a very young person. There was obviously antagonism between the EU and us again back then. and the German commentator, I can't remember what the issue was. He said, we Germans don't put people into boxes like you British people do. And I thought. And I thought that was a kind of one of those kind of classic, little comments. I was not wanting to be rude about the Germans, but it was obviously something where someone was saying, somebody on the other side was kind of saying, oh, well, the Germans obviously want to do this, this, and this. And the person responded by saying, don't call us Germans. We Germans don't do that like you British do. There's a huge amount of hypocrisy in that, in the things that actually do wind us and we notice. And actually, that's why I think it's such a good place to start. Is what winds me up the most when I see it in other people. Yeah.
It's good to be reminded of that, yeah.
Yeah. Good. Any other comments or things that anyone would like to feed in? No. Normally when you're if you're in a real room with people and you say any comments, you can hear kind of little mumbles and scruffles and things. But when you're on Zoom, it's total silence till people turn their microphones on.
So
Jason, were you about to say something?
Back to the Porsche guy, Kristen. Was it a Porsche or Ferrari? I can't remember. I was listening.
I can't remember. I think it was. I think I said Porsche this time, but I think he might have said Ferrari actually. So, you
That's your
obviously know
egg-
him, Julian. You obviously know
No,
him.
I'm just thinking about your days at Royal Holloway with that garage opposite.
Oh yeah. No. Oh yeah. So you know that, yeah.
I was just thinking though, the answer to it. So if he didn't get the Porsche, did you give a biblical answer as to why he didn't get it? It was a good question, isn't it?
It was a very good question. We kind of like just put it in down to, I don't think it's supposed to be meant like that kind of answer. But just as now you've reminded me, as an amusing story, when the year I got to Holloway, the Ferrari garage put a ban. What used to happen is students would get to Royal Holloway, and a handful of them were quite smart, and they used to sign up on the register to order a new Porsche, because it took about 3 years to go through. So while they were at Holloway, and as they were getting near the top of the list, what you could then do is you could actually sell your place. So so savvy students used to register when they got there. So they used to check, you see, when I got there, where you actually were living. If you were living at Royal Holloway in the thing, you couldn't register to kind of say I wanted to buy a new Porsche. However, I had a friend who there was a wealthy family that used to kind of host students from time to time, and she looked after their house during the summer while they went away one year, and they gave her the keys to their BMW. So she drove down in the BMW and booked a test drive, which I thought was a very smart move. She was able to show the address where she lived, which was an expensive house, and she drove in the BMW. So even as a student, she got a test drive in the Ferrari. So there you go. I'm spilling somebody else's sins out to you. That's a nice, easy way of doing it. Good. Good, brilliant. Well, Jason, would you mind praying for us as we seem to get near the end?